Beck and welcome to a recap for characters, names and events in the revised edition of The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. The year is 2059 and Paige Mahoney, our main character, is 19 years old and she's a type of clairvoyant known as a dreamwalker. Her job is to invade people's minds and she works for criminal overlord Jackson Hall, also known as the White Binder. The White Binder has a crew which Paige is obviously part of, but that crew also includes Danica, Zeke, Nadine and Eliza. Haymarket Hector is also a briefly introduced character at the beginning of this book and he is higher up in the criminal pecking order than Jackson is. All of these characters live in what is called Scion London, where clairvoyancy is illegal. But the non-ghost sensing people, the naturals, that do not have the power to access the ether, those are called amorotics. Underguards are clairvoyants working for Scion and they can see auras and they hunt their own. They're like the police of Scion London. One night Paige is catching a train home on the way back from Jackson's place and she is accosted by these underguards. She fights back against them by using her dreamscape as a weapon, and when she flings it at one of the underguards to repel him, she accidentally kills him. Despite escaping the train, she manages to get across rooftops, but she is chased down and captured. She's shot with what is called a flux dart, which reacts to the people who are clairvoyants, and then she passes out. She comes to in a prison that is obviously run by Scion. She is amongst a bunch of other prisoners. Included in this group is Seb or Sebastian, who is a human who was captured by mistake, and then also Julian, who is another clairvoyant. Someone named Pleione comes to collect this group of prisoners and she is very tall and she has yellow eyes, which makes her look not human, and she says you will obey any commands you receive from the Rephaim you encounter. All of these prisoners are then taken to Oxford, which is a city that has been kept secret as a functioning city for the past 200 years. It is also known as Sheol 1, and it is where the prisoners now must survive when this city is intent on killing them. Of this city, the Rephite named Nishira Sargus is its ruler. She is called Blood Sovereign of the Rephaim and the Caesarian of the Republic of Scion as well, so she holds a lot of power. The Refs exist here because they are fighting against otherworldly creatures called the Amim or Buzzers, which feed on the flesh and spirit of people. These creatures are here because too many spirits caused a flooding of the Aether, and then the Aether broke, which caused the breaking of the netherworld, and therefore the Amim could get in, and then the Rephaim had to flee their home. Because they had to abandon their home in 1859, the Rephaim fled to what is now Scion London, and that is where they negotiated with London's human government. They essentially instigated Scion and what has become Scion London, and they did this to stop the Amim from invading and killing everybody who existed. They are determined to protect Earth from falling to the Amim. Now in Oxford, these prisoners alongside Paige are being trained up to fight against the Amim. Their role is, with their clairvoyant energy signature, it's to draw the Amim's attention away from the human population in London and redirect it to Oxford instead, where they will fight off the Amim and save the people in London, but at what cost? And now we get to the title of the book, because every 10 years a collection of prisoners is taken from Scion and then trained up as these prisoners, and this collecting and this harvesting is called a bone season. When the prisoners arrive in Oxford, they are assigned a keeper each, and Nishira's blood consort, Arcturus the Warden, he assigns himself to be Paige's keeper. There is a hierarchy that exists in this fractured society of Oxford, and that is what is known as becoming a red jacket for these prisoners. They are tested, and then if they are successful, they become a pink jacket. After the pink jacket test, they are subjected to a red jacket test, and then once they are a red jacket, they are considered loyal to the Rephaim and are sent out on missions to attack and kill the Buzzers. If for any reason they fail these tests, they are brought into the performers circle instead, and the performers regularly put on shows for the Rephaim, or if any dignitaries come to make deals with the Rephaim. We are introduced to Liz Rymore, who is an aerial silks performer, and she deliberately failed the red jacket test so she could become a performer and avoid having to fight the Amim altogether. Someone called the Overseer is in charge of all of the performers. He controls them, and he also answers to Suhail, who is a vicious Rephite. There is a rule that the refs are supposed to leave the prisoners alone, but Suhail doesn't care about these rules and he feeds on Liz, leaving her fatigued and her eyes bleeding. In these early stages of the book, Warden starts training Paige so that she can strengthen her dreamwalking gift and eventually throw her mind away from her body in a form of attacking. To do this, it's called invading dreamscapes, and she did this at the beginning of the book, but she is trying to now master it and control it. When she was working with Jackson, to do this, she needed to be hooked up to oxygen to to achieve this outcome, and Warden is trying to train her to do it without needing this kind of support. After a training session, they are leaving this particular grounds and they pass by Thuban, a Rephite, and also his prisoner Ivy, who has previous criminal connections that Paige recognizes later on. Ivy is subjected to a lot of abuse by Thuban. After they pass these characters by, Paige and Warden run into the Overseer. Paige has to contain her outrage because the Overseer is responsible for her capture. He is the one that chased her across rooftops and shot her with the flux dart at the beginning of the book. Accompanying the Overseer is a character named David, and he is an oracle. Oracles have the ability to project images into people's minds, and he projects something into Paige's mind, and then the next day they end up meeting up at the location that he has shown her. She doesn't trust him, obviously, because he was with the Overseer, but she gathers information from him anyway, and he reveals that because the Overseer caught David and Paige, he was almost redeemed in the eyes of the Rephaim and Scion because he caught two powerful clairvoyants. Basically, their capture saved his reputation. While all of these different touch points are occurring in the plot, by the way, weeks of time are passing. And then one night, Warden comes home to his rooms and Paige finds him and he's been all scratched up in an attack, and she helps patch up his injuries. When she's leaving the parlor after she's patched him up, Cleone comes in and says Warden needs to eat and brings a person in with her, and Paige is disgusted and then cold shoulders Warden for like 3 weeks. During that 3 weeks of avoiding Warden, she manages to accumulate the different items required for a lockpick set. She then uses this lockpick set to break into Oxford's old library, and in there she finds a journal hidden under one of the shelves that belonged to the traitor. So 20 years ago there was a rebellion and an uprising called Novembertide, but because of the betrayal of one human, it all came crashing down and it was unsuccessful. Everyone is looking for Paige because she's been skulking around and hiding, and Liz manages to find her in time and helps Paige wash the ink from her fingers in the performer's home in the rookery. Julian happens to be in there at the same time that Liz returns with Paige, and he goes out to distract all of the red jackets so they don't find her as quickly and buys them time to wash the ink from her hands. Paige is then sneaking back into Mordelin, which is Warden's residence, but before she can get back inside, Suhail stops her. Paige knows that she is in danger because in a previous scene, Suhail did try to kill her in front of Nashira. During that time, Paige used her dreamscape and rebounded it against Suhail and knocked him down, and he has wanted revenge on her ever since. This time he grabs her and feeds on her and then drags her back into Warden's residence, and his eyes are red. Usually Paige can sense dreamscapes, but for some reason she can't sense Suhail's, which is why he got the drop on her. And when Warden sees Suhail and Suhail's red eyes, he manages to dismiss Suhail and almost save Paige from any further affliction or feeding upon. As revenge though, Suhail throws Paige down a set of stairs. After patching her up a bit, they're sitting in Warden's parlor, and Warden reveals that Nashira is trying to get Paige trained up so that she can harvest Paige's gift from her. She essentially wants to kill Paige, take the dream walking ability, and bind it to herself. Nashira already has several guardian angels, and she just wants to add Paige's gift to her powerful collection. Because they can't put it off any longer, Warden has been trying to buy her time so that he doesn't have to train her and then Nashira will not kill her as soon. They can't buy any more time, and Warden then starts training Paige properly. Paige ends up sleeping in the parlor where it's warmer, and the trust between both Warden and Paige starts to build. While Paige is dreaming, we get to see a flashback to her memory of the Molly riots in Ireland. In her dream, she's 6 years old. She's with her older cousin Finn in Ireland, and they are going to a rebellion against Scion. Scion are trying to come in and take over Ireland, but there is obviously a protest going on. Finn and all his uni friends are saying Mayfair is coming, and Mayfair is the mayor of Scion London. As a consequence for the protests, Scion massacres Ireland. Paige is one of the few people left alive to carry on the message of Scion's ruling power. In present day though, Paige wakes up in the middle of a forest. She had been drugged, and this is the beginning of her test to get her pink jacket. In the forest, Paige is fighting and squaring off against an Amim, and she manages to hide and escape and make her way back to Oxford. Eventually it recognizes that she is in the shadows though, and it follows, attacks her and breaks her wrist, and she just manages to survive. As she's crossing the finish line to pass this first test, David the Oracle manages to shoot the buzzer down and kill it. While Paige is healing from her broken wrist though, she talks to Warden, and Warden says, on the condition that I continue to train you, you need to have supper with me once every week. He's trying to build the trust between them, and he shows her a copy of The Merits of Unnaturalness, which is written by the White Binder, or Jackson, and he hands it to her when initially she thought he was going to blackmail her. The reason that Warden had this in the first place was because when they first kidnapped Paige, he went through her backpack and took it so that Nashira and all the other refs didn't recognize that she was linked to the criminal underworld of Scion London. To demonstrate this relationship of trust that he wants to build, he hands The Merits of Unnaturalness over to her, and she is then free to throw it in the fire and burn it, and essentially destroy any evidence that she was connected to the criminal underworld. In exchange for him keeping this huge secret about her, she continues keeping his secrets, the fact that he sneaks out, the fact that he's been injured, and that he's just gone for extended periods of time. Now that Paige's wrist is healing a bit more, she gets out of Magdalen, Warden's residence, and she goes down to the Rookery to visit Liss. Unfortunately, the Red Jackets are waiting for her, and they ambush her because they do not think she's worthy of passing her pink jacket test. They have been brainwashed by the hierarchy in Oxford, and so they attack her. In the ensuing scuffle, a stove gets knocked, a fire gets started, and one of the Red Jackets, Rach, who used to be roommates with Liss, and they've got a connection there, she snatches Liss's fortune-telling cards and throws them into the fire. This destroys Liss's connection to the Aether, so she goes into spirit shock. Also, Rach tackled Paige and injured her broken wrist further. Eventually, the Rephaim intervene in the fight, and Rach's Rephaim keeper, Kraz, just kills her without a second thought for insubordination. Julian helps Liss escape the fire and get away so that she can rest. When Paige's broken wrist is healed, she has a final test with Nashira directly as a form of conversation to become a Red Jacket. They have tea together in front of all of the Red Jackets at a banquet. Paige manages to skirt her way around being involved in the criminal underworld in conversation with Nashira. She also manages to convince Nashira of Warden's compliance and hide the fact that he has been sneaking out all this time. Because it seems that Nashira believes this, Paige is granted her Red Jacket and she just skates by the Red Jacket test. At this same banquet though, Paige and a bunch of other Red Jackets, including David and Carl, are given a mission in Scion London to apprehend a bunch of criminals. Nashira wants the White Binder and the Seven Seals because they are powerful clairvoyants, and she obviously wants their power for herself, but she doesn't necessarily realize the connection to Paige. Meanwhile, Paige is freaking out because now she has to go and attack and capture her old crew. In London, the Seven Seals crew are meeting with Antoinette Carter, and she is a strong voyant too. She's also Irish and a survivor of the Molly riots. Paige obviously wants to warn her crew about what's going on, but her lips are glued together like all of the other prisoners, and her face is covered so she's unrecognizable. During the clash and combat with her and her crew, she has to figure out a way to make them recognize her. She also has to somehow comply with the prisoner's mission of trying to take them in, otherwise Nashira will suspect her. So she's walking this very fine, dangerous line. While she's going head to head with Jackson, she launches her dreamscape at him and knocks him down, and he then recognizes the flavor of the dreamscape and knows that it's her. The rest of the crew are escaping and or being attacked, and Paige jumps into David to possess him briefly so that he doesn't end up shooting Eliza. While her dreamscape has left her body though, her body is vulnerable and she receives a stun rod to the back and therefore is weakened. The Seven Seals crew manage to escape, but Nick ambushes Paige because she has attacked Jackson, the syndicate leader, therefore she must pay. He doesn't obviously know it is her and he ends up stabbing her. While the main fight and the main Rephaim are distracted in pursuit of Antoinette Carter, Paige uses her dreamscape to reach out to Nick, and he is absolutely horrified that he has injured her this badly. He's obviously desperate to save her, but he can't really do anything because she has been implanted with a tracking device from Nashira, so she can't escape. And as he's trying to figure out what to do, Warden comes to the rescue and promises Nick that Paige will be taken care of. While all this is happening, Antoinette Carter also manages to escape. Eventually, Paige wakes up, she's been stitched up and she's healing slowly. Warden is at her bedside, and because Paige managed to possess David while they were trying to capture the Seven Seals, Nashira has given more time to train because she wants Paige's gift to be fully realized before she takes it from her. Also, while Paige is in the midst of this healing process, Warden reveals that here is an oniromancer. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. What this means is he can make somebody dream their own memories and he can then view those memories. And that is what he's been doing to Paige the whole time that she's been staying with him. He knows all about the massacre of the Molly riots. He knows how much Nick means to her. And this whole time he's known that she's got a significant link to the White Binder of the criminal underworld. Just as they were beginning to form this bond of trust, Paige is outraged and feels like she has been utterly betrayed by him. He does tell her though that 20 years ago there was another attempt at a rebellion, but Warden was part of that rebellion and he was betrayed by one human, which is why he doesn't trust easily either. And so he was reading her memories in order to see whether he could trust her so that he doesn't have to go through the abuse again by being found out. In the past, Nishira has whipped and beaten him and scarred him for being involved in the rebellion at all. While Paige is processing all of these emotions with these new revelations, the butler for Warden, Michael, enters and brings her breakfast. He also brings her a note from Warden and a gift, and that gift is a vial of pollen, and this pollen is really the only way to make a dent in a Rephium. While the flux darts and bullets slow them down, it doesn't kill them, but the pollen from a poppy does, and that is what the pollen is in this vial that Michael has given Paige. Eventually, Paige's outrage of Warden invading her memories and her privacy, it starts to mellow because she realizes that if it was the other way around, and if it was her protecting a cause and people that she cared about, she probably would have done the same thing that Warden did to make sure that everyone remained safe and hidden. So while she understands, she's still a bit frustrated, but that mellows eventually. Once she can move around again, Paige goes to visit Julian to check in on Liz, and while she's there, she also reveals her role as the Pale Dreamer in connection to the White Binder, and that she's got a high up position in London's criminal underworld. Paige also talks to Julian about a potential rebellion now, and he is interested and keen to support her, and so are some of the other performers from the Rookery. But first, Paige wants to help Liz, and to do that she needs to get more Numa, N-U-M-A. That means clairvoyant items. She needs to find more cards basically for Liz to latch onto, so that instead of going into spirit shock and her spirit leaving her and passing away, she can bring it back and latch onto something. So to steal these new cards and hopefully restore Liz's voyant ability, Paige breaks into one of the towers in Oxford. She breaks into this tower because when all of the prisoners are initially brought into Oxford, everything that they had with them are confiscated by the Rephium and stored in this tower. While she is exploring this tower though and trying to find where the Numa are stored, she overhears two refs coming and she hides in a nearby cupboard. The refs enter the room that she was in, which is the weaponry, and they're speaking in gloss in their own language, but one of the refs, Terrible, opens the cupboard, sees Paige inside, glares at her, and then shuts the doors, and then continues the conversation in English so Paige can understand what's going on. Terrible is secretly a rebel working with Warden, but she hasn't obviously revealed herself for obvious reasons until now, and she's checking this tower with Thuban. When Thuban leaves, Terrible gives directions to Paige of where the Numa are stored so she can go and collect the cards for Liz. Still reeling from narrowly avoiding capture, Paige manages to locate the cards, and as she's leaving, Kraz finds her. He is the same Rephium that killed Rach earlier in the story and absolutely had no remorse for her. He is also the closest heir to the Saga's throne after Nishira. Paige panics because Kraz can't know why she's here, therefore she attacks him, and he attacks her because he's not a fan of her anyway. Paige has infused a few flux darts with some of the pollen that Warden gave her, and she shoots him with one of those. As Kraz is going grey and decaying and dying, Warden comes onto the scene. He ignores Kraz entirely and takes Paige away from the scene, so she's not found with Kraz's body. When they're back in Warden's parlour, Paige says to Warden that he doesn't seem to care that the heir to the throne is dead, obviously meaning Kraz, and Warden, being very regal, says to her, "I do not recognize the legitimacy of tyrants." Also in Warden's parlour, they discuss an event coming up called the Bicentenary, which is an event that's happening soon, and it's hosted by Nishira. They've got a month until it arrives. This event is to bring Scion dignitaries to Oxford and to reinforce the ref's power over unnaturalness, and to spruik the fact that they want to create another version of this camp in France and call it Shield 2. Warden also reveals in this conversation that he has realized that he and Paige are somehow connected by the Aether in what is called a golden cord, but he doesn't know what this means or how it originated or how to stop it from happening. Essentially, if both of them concentrate on the golden cord, they can sense each other, and that is how Warden knew that Kraz was attacking Paige, and it's how he found her. Paige also asks Warden to help save Liz using the cards that she found for her, and with Warden's help, they manage to restore Liz's connection to her clairvoyant ability and bring her back to life again. At this fast approaching Bicentenary, this is the event where Nishira is finally going to harvest Paige's gift from her. It is also a night that Paige is hoping to escape Nishira and take the train that the dignitaries came to Oxford on, and instead use that as an escape to get all of the prisoners out of Oxford. To put on a show for all of the dignitaries attending from various Scion countries, the performers put on a show for the reenactment of the Bloody King, and Liz is a performer enacting the role of one of the 5 victims in the show. During the show, Paige goes under and behind the stage and manages to find Warden. He gifts her a pendant, which is a repellent against Nashira's poltergeist. And in their close proximity and their vulnerability, now that trust has built between them, they kiss. So of course Nashira discovers them in this intimate moment. They are pulled apart and Warden is imprisoned in what is called the gallery, and Paige is dragged onto stage with Nashira. Nashira has figured out who Paige is after all. She's realized the criminal connection and she intends to take Paige's life on stage in front of everyone. While Nashira is going to collect a symbolic sword that is like a weapon of Scion, she tells El Safi, one of the refs, to seal Paige's mouth so she can't say anything else on stage and she can't rebel that way. But El Safi is secretly one of the rebels on Warden's side and he keeps her mouth unsealed. When Paige and Nashira are on stage together in front of all of Scion, the rebels start to sing a forbidden Irish song on Paige's behalf. Liz is one of these singers. The gloves are off and Paige and Nashira launch themselves at each other's dreamscapes. Paige manages to possess Nashira and she makes Nashira launch herself onto the symbolic sword that Nashira brought onto stage. This symbolic sword is called the Wrath of the Inquisitor, but it doesn't really have an impact. It just kind of slows Nashira down and the fight continues. Nashira lunges at Paige to try and take her down, but Warden manages to get there in time and block the blow that is meant for Paige. In all of this chaos, the door bursts open and in walks Jackson Hall saying that he wants his Dreamwalker back. Everyone is making their escape and Paige turns back because Liz isn't with them. Liz was swinging around helping people and navigating using the aerial silks, but at the last moment Gomezia, who is one of the Rephites, cut the silks that Liz was balancing on and Liz then fell to her death. Earlier in the story, when they're first becoming friends, Liz did a card reading for Paige and she revealed to Paige at that moment too that she did a reading for herself and she saw herself falling from a great height and that is how she died. In that moment with Gomezia, it came true and Paige wondered if she'd known more about this event that she could have prevented it. Paige also never got to see the last card in her card reading that Liz did for her, so she doesn't know how her story is going to end. So therefore, can she prevent it? While everyone is escaping onto the streets in Oxford and making their way to the train, Paige comes across a padlock and infused in that padlock is Seb, one of the humans from the very start that was just caught up in all of this clairvoyance because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time and he was then killed and turned into a poltergeist. And Paige has to reassure and free him and then the padlock is broken and then everyone can get on the train that is leaving Oxford and going back to London. Jackson manages to track down Paige and he gets ahead of everyone with Paige and his crew and he's trying to convince Paige to leave everyone else behind and prioritize Jackson and his crew instead. Paige is reluctant to leave everyone behind and she stands up to Jackson in this moment. He ends up grabbing her by the back of the neck like she's an animal and she realizes after all this time that he doesn't actually care about her. He only cares about her gift and what she can do for him, not who she is as a person. She takes a final stand against him and walks away, and when she does, most of the gang follow after her as well. Just before the train ends up leaving, Paige is on the platform saying her final goodbyes to Warden. Essentially, she realizes that this is the last time that they're probably going to see each other, and he says if things get desperate, he'll find her. And there you go, that was the revised edition of The Bone Season. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll come chat to you below in the comments, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.